I always thought of my family as boringly normal, but when my 12-year-old grandson pressed a crumpled piece of paper into my palm under the dinner table, my blood ran cold. The note had 8 terrified words that tore my family apart. Check. Storage unit. 113. Before Thursday. The Sunday roast at my son David's house was a tradition that had started to feel more like an obligation over the last few years. I'm a creature of habit, a retired high school history teacher who likes his evenings quiet and his coffee black. But I loved my son, and I absolutely adored my grandson, Leo. So, every Sunday at 5:00 p.m., I parked my old Ford F-150 in their pristine suburban driveway, wiped my boots on the welcome mat that Brenda, my daughter-in-law, insisted be perfectly centered, and walked into a house that always felt just a few degrees too cold. This particular Sunday, the tension in the dining room was thick enough to carve with the sterling silver steak knives Brenda only brought out to impress guests. "Arthur, you're quiet tonight," Brenda said, her voice carrying that usual crisp, authoritative edge. She was a striking woman, always dressed as if she were about to step into a corporate boardroom rather than serve mashed potatoes. Her blonde hair was pulled back tightly, mirroring the tight, strained smile on her face. "Just enjoying the meal, Brenda," I replied, forcing a polite nod. "The beef is excellent. It was dry, actually, but you didn't criticize Brenda, not in her house." I shifted my gaze to my son. David looked terrible. He was 38, but easily looked a decade older. There were deep, bruised bags under his eyes, and he had lost weight, a lot of it. He sat at the head of the table, mechanically pushing a single piece of carrot around his plate. He hadn't spoken more than 3 words since I arrived. He was a junior partner at a mid-sized accounting firm, a job that had been bleeding the life out of him for the past 6 months. Whenever I asked him about it, he just brushed me off, citing audit season. But the real reason my stomach was tied in knots wasn't David's exhaustion, nor was it Brenda's chilling perfectionism. It was Leo. Normally, Leo was a beacon of chaotic preteen energy. He usually spent Sunday dinners rambling about his Little League batting average, the complexities of the latest video game he was playing, or asking me endless questions about World War II history. Tonight, he was a ghost. He sat directly across from me, his shoulders hunched, his eyes glued to his lap. He hadn't touched his food. Every time Brenda spoke, I noticed a microscopic flinch in his posture. "So, Arthur," Brenda continued, slicing her meat with surgical precision, "we have some exciting news. We're taking a spontaneous family trip to Europe, leaving this Thursday." I paused, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. "Europe? This Thursday? That is spontaneous. What about school for Leo? What about the firm? David?" David didn't look up. "It's been cleared, Dad. I need a break. We all do." His voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "We thought a few weeks in the Swiss Alps would be perfect," Brenda added, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Just the 3 of us, reconnecting." I looked at Leo. He was gripping his napkin so tightly his knuckles were white. He slowly raised his head, and for a fleeting second, our eyes met. The look he gave me wasn't just sadness. It was pure, unadulterated terror. "Well," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady, "that sounds wonderful. I'm sure it'll be a great experience for you, buddy." I forced a smile at Leo, but he immediately looked back down at his lap. A few minutes later, Brenda stood up to fetch the dessert from the kitchen. David excused himself, muttering something about needing to take a heartburn pill, and retreated toward the upstairs bathroom. For a brief window, it was just Leo and me at the table. I leaned forward, keeping my voice to a whisper. "Hey, you okay, pal? You haven't said a word all night." Leo didn't speak. He darted a panicked glance toward the kitchen doorway, where the sounds of Brenda clattering plates echoed. Then, he scooted his chair slightly forward. Under the heavy mahogany dining table, I felt the toe of his sneaker tap against my shin. I dropped my hand down to my lap. A second later, I felt small, trembling fingers press a small, tightly folded square of paper into my palm. I immediately closed my fist around it. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide and glossy with unshed tears. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head, a silent plea not to say anything. "Dessert," Brenda announced, sweeping back into the room holding a tray of lemon tarts. David trailed in behind her, looking paler than before. I slipped the note into my slacks, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. The rest of the evening was a blur. I ate the tart. I drank the decaf coffee. I made small talk about the weather in my garden. All the while, that little piece of paper burned a hole against my thigh. When it was finally time to leave, I put on my coat in the foyer. David gave me a weak, one-armed hug. "See you, Dad. Thanks for coming." "Have a good trip, son. Call me when you land," I said, patting his back. I could feel the sharp ridges of his shoulder blades through his sweater. I knelt down to hug Leo. He threw his arms around my neck and held on with a desperate, crushing grip. He buried his face in my shoulder, and I could feel him shaking. "Be good, Leo," I whispered into his ear. "I love you, Grandpa," he whispered back, his voice cracking. I walked out to my truck, the cool night air hitting my face. I didn't even start the engine. The moment the cab door clicked shut, I turned on the dome light and jammed my hand into my pocket. My fingers were clumsy as I unfolded the piece of torn notebook paper. The handwriting was jagged, written in a rushed, frantic pencil. It was definitely Leo's handwriting, but stripped of all its usual neatness. "Check storage unit 113 before Thursday. Please, Grandpa. They are lying." I stared at the paper until the letters blurred. Storage unit 113. I knew exactly where that was. 2 years ago, when David and Brenda were remodeling their basement, David had rented a unit at the Oak Creek storage facility on the edge of town to hold some antique furniture. He had asked me to follow him there in my truck to help unload a heavy oak desk. They are lying. I looked back through the windshield at the house. The porch light clicked off, casting the front windows into darkness. My son was fading away. My daughter-in-law was suddenly orchestrating a highly uncharacteristic, spontaneous escape to Switzerland, and my grandson was silently begging for his life. I folded the note, slipped it into my wallet, and started the engine. I wasn't going home. Monday morning broke with a heavy, relentless drizzle, mirroring the dread sitting in the pit of my stomach. I hadn't slept a wink. I spent the night sitting in my armchair in the dark, drinking lukewarm tea, running every possible scenario through my head. Was David in debt to dangerous people? Was Brenda having an affair and trying to flee? Why the storage unit? And most importantly, how did a 12-year-old boy know about it? By 8 a.m., I was parked down the street from Oak Creek Storage. It was an old, run-down facility, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. There was no security guard, just an automated electronic keypad at the main gate. I pulled my truck up to the keypad, my wipers squeaking loudly against the glass. The rain was coming down harder now. I rolled down the window, the cold mist spraying my face. I stared at the metal keypad. I needed a pin. I racked my brain. David was a creature of habit, even worse than me. He never used random numbers. He used birthdays, anniversaries, significant dates. I punched in his birth year. Error. I punched in Brenda's birthday. Error. I wiped the rain from my eyes. What would David use for a random storage unit he barely visited? Leo. I typed in 0824, August 24th, Leo's birthday. A loud mechanical clack echoed through the rain, and the heavy metal gate slowly began to slide open. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding and drove through, my tires crunching over the wet gravel. The facility was laid out in long, uniform rows of faded orange corrugated metal doors. I drove slowly, watching the painted numbers. 98, 102, 108. I turned the corner to the back row, the area furthest from the main road, obscured by a line of dying pine trees. There it was, Unit 1, 13. I parked the truck directly in front of it, leaving the engine running. I grabbed the heavy-duty bolt cutters from the space behind my passenger seat, a tool I used for repairing chain-link fences on my property, but today they were going to serve a much more illicit purpose. I stepped out into the rain and approached the unit. A heavy brass padlock secured the latch. I didn't hesitate. I didn't care if I was breaking the law. My grandson's terrified face was burned into my retinas. I positioned the jaws of the cutters over the shackle of the lock, braced my boots against the wet concrete, and pushed down with all my strength. My 65-year-old shoulders screamed in protest, but the metal gave way with a sharp crack. The severed lock fell to the ground. I threw the cutters into the bed of my truck, grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight, and pulled the rolling door upward. It shrieked on its rusted tracks, echoing like a banshee in the quiet, rainy morning. I stepped inside and flicked on the flashlight. I was expecting to see the antique desk, maybe some cardboard boxes filled with old winter clothes or dusty photo albums. What I saw instead made the blood freeze in my veins. The unit was spotless. It had been completely cleared of any furniture. Instead, sitting in the center of the concrete floor was a folding metal table. On the table sat a heavy-duty commercial paper shredder, a large digital safe, and a glowing laptop connected to a portable power bank. But it was the back wall of the unit that made me step back in horror. A massive corkboard had been mounted to the corrugated metal. It was covered in documents, bank statements, printed emails, and photographs, all connected by an intricate web of red yarn. It looked like the chaotic wall of a deranged conspiracy theorist. I approached the board slowly, my flashlight beam shaking as I illuminated the papers. They were corporate financial records from David's accounting firm, but there were heavy, black redactions everywhere. Next to them were offshore bank transfer receipts, millions of dollars, moving from the firm's escrow accounts into shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and then quietly funneled into a private bank in Geneva, Switzerland. The signatures authorizing the transfers were David's. My heart broke. Oh, David, what have you done? Embezzlement. He was stealing from his own firm. That explained the weight loss, the paranoia, the sudden trip to Europe. He was running. But as I leaned closer, narrowing my eyes at the signatures, a terrible realization washed over me. I had been a teacher for 40 years. I had graded thousands of handwritten essays. I knew my son's handwriting. He was a lefty. His script always slanted backward, hurried and messy. The signatures on these documents were slanted forward. The loops on the D and the A were perfectly, mechanically consistent. It wasn't a rushed signature. It was a carefully practiced imitation. It was the handwriting of someone who wrote with meticulous, controlling precision. Brenda. I moved my flashlight to the photographs pinned to the board. There were pictures of David, secretly taken from a distance. David getting coffee. David walking to his car. David sitting at his desk. Next to the photos was a printed email, sent from an anonymous account to the senior partners at David's firm. I read the opening line. It has come to my attention that David is engaging in severe financial misconduct. She wasn't just stealing the money. She was framing him. She was building a perfectly documented paper trail that pointed entirely to my son. I turned my attention to the metal table. The digital safe was sitting there, and to my absolute shock, the heavy steel door was slightly ajar. Leo must have followed her here, found the code, and in his panic, failed to click it shut all the way. God bless that brave, terrified boy. I pulled the safe door open. Inside were three things. First, a thick stack of $100 bills, neatly banded. Second, 2 passports. I flipped them open. One bore a photo of Brenda, but her hair was dyed dark brown, and the name read Alice Harper. The other passport was for Leo. His photo, but the name read Lucas Harper. There was no passport for David. Third, and most chilling of all, was a leather-bound folder. I pulled it out and opened it. It was a life insurance policy, a massive, comprehensive policy taken out on David's life, with a payout of $4 million. The primary beneficiary was Brenda. I flipped to the last page. The policy had a specific clause highlighted in yellow. It stated that the payout would be expedited in the event of accidental death occurring during international travel. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I had to lean against the cold metal wall to keep from collapsing. They were going to Switzerland on Thursday. Brenda had the money, the fake identities for her and Leo, and the evidence neatly packaged to destroy David's reputation if he survived. But looking at the insurance policy, I realized David wasn't meant to survive the trip. Brenda wasn't just planning to steal and run. She was planning to become a very wealthy, untraceable widow. Check storage unit 113 before Thursday, Leo knew. Somehow, that brilliant boy had pieced it together, realized his father was walking into a death trap, and that he was going to be dragged away by a monster. He couldn't go to the police, who would believe a 12-year-old over a respected, flawless woman like Brenda. So, he came to the only person he knew would blindly fight for him, me. I grabbed the passports, the insurance policy, and the fake bank transfers, shoving them into the deep pockets of my heavy coat. I needed to get to the police. I needed to get to David. Suddenly, the distinct sound of tires crunching on wet gravel echoed through the open door of the unit. I froze. The headlights of an approaching vehicle swept across the rain-slicked pavement outside, casting long, menacing shadows into the unit. The vehicle pulled up right behind my truck, effectively blocking me in. I heard an engine cut off. Then, the heavy thud of a car door slamming shut. I reached blindly into my pocket, my fingers wrapping around the cold, heavy handle of my flashlight as a silhouette stepped into the doorway of Unit 113. The silhouette in the doorway remained perfectly still for a terrifying second, backlit by the sweep of the headlights cutting through the relentless morning rain. My grip tightened on the cold, knurled aluminum of the heavy maglite flashlight in my pocket. My thumb instinctively found the power button. "Step away from the table, Arthur," a voice called out. It wasn't Brenda. The voice belonged to a man. It was smooth, calm, and terrifyingly steady. He took a step into the unit, the ambient light from the gloomy morning finally catching his face. He was perhaps in his early 40s, wearing a tailored navy raincoat that looked entirely out of place in a rusted storage facility. I didn't know his name, but I recognized his face instantly. He was the man in the background of several of the surveillance photos pinned to the corkboard, the one watching David get coffee, the one observing my son's office building. "Who are you?" I demanded, forcing my voice not to tremble. I slowly pulled my hand from my coat pocket, keeping the heavy flashlight concealed along the side of my leg. "My name is Mitchell," he said, stepping fully out of the rain. "I'm a financial consultant, working closely with Brenda to ensure her future is secure, and you, unfortunately, are trespassing." He reached into the deep pocket of his raincoat, and when his hand emerged, the dim light glinted off the matte black barrel of a suppressed handgun. My stomach plummeted. This wasn't just white-collar crime anymore. This was a sophisticated, violent conspiracy, and I was the only thing standing between these monsters and my son's life. "Drop the folders, old man," Mitchell ordered, gesturing with the weapon. "Put the passports and the insurance policy back in the safe. We don't have to make this a tragedy today. Brenda warned me you were a stubborn guy. But you don't want to die in a dirty storage unit, do you?" My mind raced. He was blocking the only exit. My F-150 was parked just outside, but his sleek black sedan was boxed right behind it. I looked at Mitchell, then at the folding metal table separating us, heavily laden with the commercial shredder and the digital safe. "You think you're going to get away with this?" I asked, stalling for time. "Embezzling millions, framing my son, murdering him in Europe. You think a fake passport is going to hide Brenda from the authorities?" Mitchell chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Brenda is a very thorough woman. By Thursday evening, David will have suffered a tragic, fatal hiking accident in the Alps. A devastated widow will return home to collect a life insurance payout, only to be utterly shocked when the firm discovers her late husband was stealing from them. It's a flawless narrative. Now, the folders. Put them down." "All right," I said, raising my empty left hand in surrender. "All right, you win. Just don't shoot." I stepped forward, bringing myself right up to the edge of the folding table. With my right hand, still concealing the flashlight, I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the thick, banded stack of $100 bills I had taken from the safe. Mitchell's eyes darted down to the cash for a fraction of a second. It was all the distraction I needed. With a guttural roar that tore my throat, I didn't drop the money. I hurled the heavy stack of bills directly at his face. Simultaneously, I kicked the underside of the folding metal table with every ounce of strength in my 65-year-old legs. The heavy table launched forward. The commercial paper shredder and the steel safe slid off the back, crashing onto the concrete with a deafening, echoing boom. The edge of the table slammed violently into Mitchell's thighs just as the stack of money hit his chest. He stumbled backward, crying out in pain, his arm flailing as the gun discharged. A muffled thwip sounded, and a spark flew from the corrugated metal wall 3 feet to my left. I didn't wait for him to recover. I lunged over the fallen table, bringing the heavy maglite up in a vicious arc. I brought it down hard on his gun hand. I heard the satisfying crunch of bone, followed by a scream of pure agony. The handgun clattered to the wet concrete. I shoved my shoulder into his chest, knocking him flat onto his back in the puddles outside the unit. He gasped for air, clutching his shattered wrist. I scrambled past him, diving into the driver's seat of my truck. I slammed the door, locked it, and threw the engine into reverse. I didn't care about the paint job. I floored the accelerator. The heavy steel bumper of my F-150 slammed into the side of his black sedan with a horrific crunch of twisting metal and shattering glass, shoving it violently out of the way. I shifted into drive and peeled out of the storage facility, my tires spinning in the mud and gravel, the stolen evidence safely tucked inside my coat. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I sped down the rain-slicked highway toward the city. I grabbed my old cell phone from the cup holder and dialed David's private office line. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding utterly exhausted. "Dad, I'm in the middle of an audit. I can't, really." "David, listen to me very carefully," I interrupted, my voice leaving no room for argument. "Do not ask questions. I need you to stand up, walk out of your office right this second, and drive to Oak Ridge Middle School. Pick up Leo. Then drive straight to the Central Police Precinct on 4th Avenue. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Brenda is picking Leo up today for a dentist appointment." "Do not let Brenda near that boy," I roared, the steering wheel trembling under my grip. "David, she is framing you for embezzlement, and she is planning to kill you in Switzerland. I have the proof. I have everything. Get Leo and go to the police station. I will meet you there in 20 minutes. There was a long, agonizing pause on the line. Then, the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. "I'm leaving now," David whispered. 20 minutes later, I sprinted through the double doors of the precinct. My clothes were soaked, my boots leaving muddy tracks on the linoleum floor. I saw David pacing near the reception desk, looking frantic. Sitting on a plastic bench nearby was Leo, his backpack clutched to his chest. When Leo saw me, he dropped his bag and ran. I caught him in a desperate embrace, burying my face in his hair. He was shaking, sobbing into my wet coat. "You found it, Grandpa," he cried. "You checked." "I got it, buddy. You're safe. You're both safe," I promised, looking up at David. My son looked like he was going to be sick. I demanded to see Detective Ryan Hughes, a former high school student of mine who was now a senior investigator in the fraud division. Within minutes, the three of us were sitting in a secure conference room. I emptied my pockets onto the metal table, the forged bank transfers, the fake passports for Brenda and Leo, the $4 million life insurance policy. David stared at the documents, all the color draining from his face. He picked up the passport with his wife's picture and the name Alice Harper. His hands trembled violently. She packed her bags last night, he choked out, tears finally spilling over his bruised eyes. She said she wanted to get a head start on the luggage. Detective Hughes didn't waste a single second. He took one look at the evidence, radioed for backup, and dispatched 3 tactical cruisers to David's suburban home. But they were too late. When the police kicked the door in, the house was empty. Brenda had received a call from Mitchell Davies. She knew the storage unit was compromised. For 3 agonizing hours, we sat in that police station. David sat with his head in his hands, his entire reality crumbling around him. I sat next to him, a hand firmly on his shoulder, while Leo slept curled up across 2 plastic chairs, exhausted by his own terror. Finally, Detective Hughes walked into the room. He offered a grim, satisfied smile. "We got her," Hughes announced. She was intercepted at the county airstrip, trying to board a private charter to Montreal. Mitchell Davies was picked up at a local hospital, trying to get his wrist set. "They're both in custody, David. And looking at this paper trail, you are completely cleared of the embezzlement charges at the firm." David broke down, completely, sobbing with a mixture of overwhelming grief and profound relief. I held my son, rocking him just like I did when he was a little boy with a scraped knee. The trial was a media circus. The flawless, perfect Brenda was exposed as a cold, calculating sociopath. She and Mitchell Davies were both sentenced to decades in federal prison for grand larceny, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. It took a long time for the dust to settle. David quit his stressful job at the firm and opened a small, independent tax practice closer to home. The dark circles under his eyes faded, replaced by a cautious but genuine peace. Our Sunday dinners changed dramatically. We didn't eat dry roast beef in a freezing, tense dining room anymore. Instead, David and Leo came over to my property. We grilled burgers on the back porch. We drank sweet tea, and we talked loudly, laughing until our stomachs hurt. One Sunday evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, casting a golden glow over the yard, I watched Leo teaching David how to throw a curveball. The terror that had once gripped my grandson's eyes was completely gone, replaced by the bright, chaotic energy of a normal 12-year-old boy. Leo jogged over to the porch to grab a bottle of water. He paused, looking at me with a soft, knowing smile. He reached out and tapped his knuckles against my arm. "Thanks, Grandpa," he said quietly. I smiled back, patting his shoulder. "Anytime, Leo, anytime." I had always thought of my family as boringly normal, but looking at my son and grandson, alive, safe, and finally happy, I realized there was nothing normal about us. We were survivors, and as long as I had breath in my lungs, no one was ever going to hurt them again. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please take a second to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring more thrilling, true storytelling to your screen every week. Drop a comment below and let me know, what would you have done in Grandpa Arthur's shoes?